All right, so at this stage, we're making an economic loss. Unfortunate, right? So here, that's our economic loss. Again, don't think of this person as not making money. They're still making money at this stage. They're just not making as much as they expect. Right? So they're only making the 50-some thousand instead of the 150,000, what have you. But the key here is when there is an economic loss in the market, what does everybody else who is growing corn, and potentially even yourself, do next year? Yeah, we start leaving the corn market, or whatever market this is, we start to exit it, right? So when there's a loss, sellers exit the market. What happens in the overall market when enough of those sellers leave the market? Shortage. What follows a shortage? Price goes up, right? So the idea here is that we were at this price, right? This price was our equilibrium. That's where we were when we were making this loss. But now, since there is a loss, people are like, oh crap, I didn't make the $100,000 I wanted to. I'm not going to stay so heavily into corn. I'm going to mix it next season, and I'm going to do beans, wheat, hay, and maybe still a little bit of corn. They want to hedge their bets a little bit. So what happens when the sellers exit the market? Supply decreases, and when supply decreases, what happens? Shortage, price goes up, right? And so the idea is that your price will start to hop, right? So if the price hops a lot, right? So let's imagine, if you will, that the price goes up a bunch because a whole ton of people got out of the corn market. So the price went way up. If the price hops up to here, what happens to the people who stayed heavily in the corn market? Money. Yeah, now all of a sudden they're making money, right? They're up there. But what's going to happen when everybody sees that people were making money? They're going to get back in. And what's going to happen when people jump into the market? The supply is increased, the price is going to go back down, and the idea is that the price is going to hop back and forth until what's it eventually going to do? It's going to even itself out is what it's going to do. So eventually it's going to pop down until it gets to that stage where there's no loss or profit. Because that's the magic spot where people say, oh, he didn't make a profit and he didn't make a loss, so I'm not going to change anything that I make. I'm just going to keep making the same amount. That is the long-run analysis, right?
So how do you stay in it then if you're not making any money?
Again, remember, you're still making money here, right? You're still making 50 grand a year. You're just not making the 100,000 that you expect to make. And so when it hops back up here, you make the 175,000 or 125,000 or whatever, but then everybody sees you're making that money, so they jump back in, the price goes back down, and the idea is that it's going to hop back and forth until eventually it's going to approach this long-run equilibrium. But the key here is that in the long run, no loss, no profit. And again, remember what I mean here. Yeah, no economic profit or no economic loss. Right, yeah. Remember when I say I'm not saying the word economic in front of it, but I always mean it. So in the long run, what we expect So in the long run, what we expect is for our price to shoot right here at the bottom of our average total cost curve so that there is no profit, there is no loss. It's normal profit, if you will. So whatever it is that you are expecting to make profit on, that's how much you're making. All right? long run average total cost curve. So the difference between ATC and LATC is that L means long run. Normally when you draw the long run, you don't draw the variable cost curve because you assume everything is variable in the long run. But this is why generally people don't run to get into perfect competitions, right? We would love it if everything, as buyers, if everything was a perfect competition, because what's going to be the price? The price is always going to be as low as it can be, which is nice if you're a buyer. The problem with it is that if you're a seller, do you want your price to be really low? No. Hell no. In fact, you hate it when the price is low, because then you're not making as much money, right? So these perfect competitions, right? Again, this is also why if you start talking to farmers, most of those farmers are like, oh no, I'm trying to point out that my corn is different than the other people's corn. Why are they trying to do that? Because they don't want it to be a perfect competition, because then they're not going to expect long-run economic profit. Again, they'll still make money, just not gobs of it, right? But if you can tell somebody that, oh wait, the feed corn I'm growing is organic, and so it's worth a lot more. It's not worth this minimum price that everybody else is paying. You should really pay me twice as much. That's what you would like, right? If you're the seller. All right, but that's one of the keys. So the other nice part about this is that since we don't expect any long-run profit, and we don't waste money on advertising, right? And don't waste money on ads. What perfect competitions happen to turn out to be is the most efficient market in the world. We produce at the most efficient point. In other words, if a farmer can figure out where the cheapest way there is to grow his crop, that's the way he's going to grow it, right? In the long run, they are at the very bottom of their average total cost curve. That's what efficient means, that you're not wasting any of your resources. And any resource, right? Land, labor, capital, all of those three things, you're using them exactly the right way to produce the correct amount of corn for the market that you're working in. All right, so again, this sort of takes us through to the end of chapter 7. This is the meat and potatoes of it, these 7 things, right? The three key characteristics that there are an infinite number of sellers, right? So many sellers that any one person doesn't make a difference. That directly leads to that, right? Because there are so many people selling corn or wheat or beans, any one bean seller can't affect the price. That's why you have to take whatever is coming from the market, all right? This, you always profit maximize here, period. This is math, folks. This is the obvious one, right? You're going to produce units where as long as you sell it for more than it costs to make it, you do it, right? This is straight math. So this one's true for everybody, period. Math is one of those black and white things so that everything is always true for that part of it. This one, long run, no loss or economic profit, that's a direct relationship to having it be easy to get in and out, right? Anytime there is profit, people say, oh, it's easy to produce corn? Fine, I'll jump in, and it'll cut the price. Anytime there's a loss, people will say, oh, it's easy to get out, I'll leave because I'm not making as much money as I should, now the price will go back up. And just remember that it's going to normalize at the no loss, no profit point. And number 7, this is really all 3. The infinite number of sellers means that our demand curve is going to be this nice flat curve. Because it's flat, that means that we can reach the bottom of our average total cost curve. Since our products are all homogeneous, they're all the same, there's no advertising, which means we don't waste any money advertising, right? If you have to spend money to advertise, that means you won't produce as much. You'll waste some of your resources to put an ad on the TV, right? And then last but not least, since it's easy to get in and out, that is also what forces the price to normalize to this spot where there is no economic profit or economic loss. All right.
But does that ever really happen, where they actually find a cost and stick with it? Or is that just kind of like a, for now?
If nothing changed, again, there's sort of a ceteris paribus built into this, right? As long as there was never a drought, and there was never a flood, and there was never, ever any sort of economic disasters that occurred, this is the way it would work. But in all reality, that never happens. But this is us playing a wishing game. All right, so are we good with Chapter 7? Sort of, anyways. Okay. Chapter 7 will make a little bit more sense when I take you to Chapter 8, because Chapter 8 is sort of the other side of the coin. So if in Chapter 7 we learned about there being an almost infinite number of sellers, what's the other side of the coin? A very limited number of sellers, and in fact, let's limit it to the least number of sellers we can have, 1. All right, so and what do we call a market that has only one seller? That's a P, I swear. Moo. I don't particularly like it either. Monopoly. Yeah. Tends to work together. It tends to take forever, and the reason it takes forever is that the goal of a monopoly is to create a monopoly. And if people who are intelligent stop everybody else from getting a monopoly, right, the game will never end, right? You can't go broke giving somebody $22 in rent, right? The only way you go broke is giving somebody $1,000 in rent, right? So monopolies are still a market that we want to analyze. And again, think of these as the two spectrums, the two ends of the market spectrum, right? So here, suppose this is the world. The world of markets that are out there. On one end, the one spectrum, over here, here's the perfect competition. That's one end of the world. You could have markets where everybody is competing as difficultly and as much as they possibly can. And the other end of the spectrum is the monopoly, where there is no competition at all, right? So what I'm really trying to do before I get to things that you guys will have a little bit more experience in, view the two ends of the spectrum that the world exists in, right? Here's one end, here's the other. Both of them are kind of fictitious if you think about it, but they're both good examples to work with. So if in a perfect competition there were lots and lots, how many sellers are there in a monopoly? One. One and only one seller. And as soon as you have more than one seller, folks, you are not a monopoly anymore.
What monopolies were illegal?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Lots of things are illegal that still happen.
Yeah.
All right, so in the perfect competition, our product was homogeneous. It was generic. Everybody could use it. Here, our product has to be something slightly different. It is a unique product. In other words, there's nothing that you can substitute for it, because if you can substitute for it, then there's someone else who's making it, and then it's not a monopoly anymore. Right. So it has to be a one-of-a-kind product of some sort. Now, you can have multiple people producing a particular product, but as long as it's localized monopoly, it's still okay, right? I mean, there's a lot of different people making electricity throughout the country, But really, in any one given region, there's only one company who is actually selling it to the people in that region. Right? All right, and then last but not least, we need to say, well, is it easy to get in and out of a monopoly?
No.
It's the exact opposite, right? It's almost impossible to get in or out. And again, that has to be the way it is, right? If you think about it, if it were even remotely possible to get into a monopoly, would it be a monopoly anymore? No, right? So that's the whole purpose, is that you can't have other people in there, and scarily enough, once you're in, you can't get out, right? Because if you get out, then no one's making it, and that product is now lost. That would also be bad, all right? So it can be both a boon and a bane type of thing. All right, so when we had the perfect competition, here's how life existed. There was supply, there was a demand in the overall market. That set the price, right? And then we, as individual sellers in the market, what did we have to do? We had to accept it. So the individual said, here's my price. This is my demand curve. Not PQ. So in a perfect competition, we were the price taker because we were such a small fish that we couldn't affect the price. Now, in a monopoly, are we a really small fish? Well, we might be, but if we are a small fish, are there other fish swimming around in the sea with us?
Nope.
No. All right. So in a monopoly, we still have supply and demand in the market. It's just that now, is there a difference between an individual and the overall market? In the perfect competition, we are one of many. In a monopoly, we are one of one. So if I draw you the market for the overall market, that is, the individual and the overall are both the same. Okay, so the nice thing about a monopoly is there's only one graph you have to worry about. In a perfect competition, you kind of have to worry about two, right? Because there's this overall market that sets your price, and then each individual has to adjust according to that price.
Is it just me that finds a little, in the wording of a little something funny? Because if you have a monopoly, you have the perfect competition, which is not.
From a seller's perspective, you have the lack of competition, not the perfect competition. So put a little caret inside of your phrase and think the perfect lack of competition. Okay? Again, these are really, the names of these markets that we're talking about are really geared from the buyer's perspective.
Okay.
Right? From a buyer's perspective, we love the perfect competition. That gets us the lowest. In a monopoly,
In that position, you're right. Because then you have some places to shop around.
that's right. Here, you're not shopping.
You have to remind us when to change our view.
And again, that's what I'm trying to do for you here, right here, is when I compare them so that you can see and have the appropriate viewpoint, right? When you're looking at perfect competition, remember that you're one small fish in the big sea as a seller. In the monopoly, you're the one small fish, or the big fish, or the fish, or the only fish, right? So you're the fish, period. All right, now, the question then is, okay, so we're instead of having to worry about going over to this graph and dealing with a flat demand curve, we now have to deal with this curve. So we need to blow that up a little bit more because it needs to be bigger. So that you can see what's going on. Now, marginal cost curves. Are the cost curves going to be any different in a monopoly than they are in a perfect competition? They might look a little different, but are they going to be different shape? No. So when I ask to draw a cost curve, I'm still going to draw the same cost curves I've been drawing all the time. Whenever you are asked to draw cost curves, you draw the 3 standard ones, right? You're going to say, okay, here's average total cost, here's average variable cost, and then shooting up through the middle, here's my marginal cost. All right, now, the one thing I will point out right off in the beginning is that in a monopoly, you don't actually have to draw the marginal cost curve, because the marginal cost curve should be the exact same as your supply curve. Okay? So notice how I've got 2 of these curves that are shooting up through the middle. You really only need one of them. They're both the same. All right? So in your graph, somehow, some way, indicate that these 2 are really the same. All right? So supply and marginal cost are really the same in a monopoly. All right? So these 2 guys are the same. So I put that as sort of like a 3.5 point on my set, so just so that you guys remember it, because when I make these lists, you tend to memorize them, and this will hopefully simplify this when you go along here. Supply equals marginal cost. And the reason why here is that the monopolist, he's trying to maximize his profit, and so he wants to figure out how much he should supply, and how much he should supply is strictly tied to whatever the costs are going to be. And so he's looking as his supply curve to be his cost curves, period. That's all there is to it. Now, the question that we need to ask, we have marginal cost. What are we missing? Well, I have total cost in here. Here's average total cost. Price. How do I figure out price? How did I figure it out back in the perfect competition?
You didn't. Somebody
It was set, right? It was set for us, right? And so, okay, we need to figure out what the price is. Well, what's the profit maximization point? Remember that we are now a monopoly, so we get to set the price. Ooh, hey, wait, there's number 4. Right? When you're a monopoly, you're the only one in there, so you're the king of everything, right? That works, right, Chris? Yeah? Since you're the only seller, you get to set the price. All right? Now, the question is where you go to find the profit maximization price.
anywhere above your average total cost.
Somewhere where you're going to be making a profit. Now, that's not necessarily true. There are times when a monopoly will operate in a loss, but we'll get to that stage. For now, though, that very rarely happens. All right? So the question is, how are we going to profit maximize? Well, what did I tell you every company or every product does to profit maximize? What did I say back in the perfect competition?
Where marginal revenue means marginal cost.
Yep. Maximize where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So the only thing that we really need to do is to figure out where the hell's our marginal revenue up there. All right, now there's a lengthy mathematical discussion that we could go through to explain where marginal revenue is, but I'm just going to sort of cut to the chase and go right to the answer. All right? So I'm not going to explain this to you at all. I'm just going to expect you to accept it and be happy. Is that all right? Okay. So when you are graphing a monopoly, you will draw a downward sloping demand curve that is a nice straight line, because you guys know that straight lines make life easier. All right? So what you do to get the marginal revenue is to say, that creates an angle. To get the marginal revenue, bisect that angle. Ooh, there's a great word, bisect. What does bisect mean?
Cut in half.
Cut it in half. Perfect. So that's all you have to do. find the angle that demand makes with the price line and cut the angle in half. So here's about the halfway point. That's what your marginal revenue is. All right, so now where does marginal revenue hit marginal cost? We always produce where marginal revenue hits marginal cost. So that will be our profit maximizing quantity. This is our quantity. Now the question comes, well, where's the price? Because if this is the price right here, what's this monopoly going to do? It's going to be losing money. So the monopolist doesn't look to its marginal revenue to set its price. What a monopolist says is he's like, if I cut my supply, what can I do to the price? I can raise it, right? So what drives the price? The quantity, and then what else? Essentially, or the people who are buying the stuff. Well, what picture up here represents the people buying things from you? Demand curve, right? So demand is what sets your price. So you take your quantity, and instead of shooting it to the marginal revenue curve, you shoot it all the way up to demand. And your demand, given this quantity, will be what sets the price. And notice now, are we making a profit in this example? Hell yeah. There's not going to be a whole lot of times where your monopoly doesn't make a profit. And that's their job, right? Their job is to take a look at the market and say, okay, if I cut my supply, I know that as I cut my supply, I can raise my price. And so that's what they do. And this is just a pictorial way of saying that's how they do it. So what monopolists know is that there's a certain amount of elasticity in demand. Elasticity. What does that make you think of? Makes you think of underwear. That's a good thing. Right? It starts to make you think about the fact that there are different levels of profit based on the price that they set, right? So monopolists get to set the price. But they know if they set the price too low, they have to produce too much, right? They don't want to do that. They don't want to have to work. They don't want to have to hire employees, right? All those things cost. So what they're trying to do is to figure out that point where they set the price higher, a certain price, or set their output to a certain level such that it will generate this much price. So they literally force there to be a shortage so that the price will be higher, which is exactly what you should expect. And that's why they're then more profitable than dealing with perfect competitions. All right? So here, that's your profit. Again, though, the steps to doing this, right? Remember, you always have a nice regular old demand curve. And that you get your marginal revenue by bisecting that curve. You will hit marginal revenue equaling marginal cost. That sets the quantity. That's all it sets, okay? The standard student mistake at this point is to say, this is the price. All right? Move to demand to get the price. All right? So it seems a little funky, but it does point out how monopolists go about figuring out where to maximize profit, right? And their goal is still to cut supply. I mean, that's their job. Because they know that when the supply is cut, you guys, the buyers, will pay more for that particular product. At the same time, though, they don't cut it so far that you guys don't buy enough of it either, right? Right? They have to figure out that magic point where the price is high enough that you'll continue to buy it, but not so high that you all of a sudden start saying, oh, well, I can do without, right? I will figure out how to quit buying gas. I will start buying an electric car. I will start riding my horse again, whatever. If the price is set too high, then they get hurt, right? So that's actually why monopolists will continue to potentially lower their price to make sure that you don't wean yourself from their product.
So their product may be something that's inelastic, but they're forcing elasticity by forcing shortage, essentially?
Strike it and reverse it, yes, though. I mean, so their demand may be elastic, right? So in other words, if gas was cheap, we would buy tons of it, right? But the fact remains is that gas companies won't make as much money if the gas prices are so low. So what they do is they make sure that those gas prices are higher so that they have more profit, right? And as long as you guys don't stop buying gas, that'll continue to happen. Now, gas isn't a really good example because it's not really a monopoly, but it's kind of close, and we'll get to those a little bit more. The best example for these tends to be electrical companies and whatnot, right? Sewage. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right.
Nobody else in the area offering the same service or product.
Right, because it's unique in this particular case. It's forced to be unique by the government. The government sells them the rights to be the only person who provides electricity in this X region. All right, so here's our setup. Now, let's see. What was point number 6? That was the long run. Are we going to have profit in the long run in a monopoly? Oh, yeah, okay. So please, number 6 is pretty much the same. Long run profit? Hell yes. That's all there is to it, okay? Monopolies do not go out of style. When you're making economic profit, you can continue to make profit. So, are they efficient? Are they at the bottom of their average total cost curve? Not even close. So, sadly, no. Nowhere near lowest point of our average total cost curve. Now, this is one of the interesting things that's happened in economics over the last decade or so. Back when I was in school and learning economics and we talked about monopolies, one of the things that my professors pointed out was that monopolies very rarely actually advertise. Gas companies, sewer companies, these people, you didn't see advertisements on TV for them. I mean, think about mid-early, late 90s. Did you ever see advertisements for the electric company? Nowadays, do you see advertising from MG&E? Yeah, all over the place. Why are they advertising? They don't have competition. They still bought the rights to have a monopoly. Why are they advertising? What good is it doing them? I mean, they have the monopoly. They don't need to tell us that they have the monopoly. We already know.
So we think that they aren't?
So that we think that they aren't. And remember, how does MG&E get a price increase? Who do they have to talk to?
The government.
The government. They have to talk to the city council. So when MG&E goes in and talks to the city council and says, we need a rate hike because we're not making enough profit and costs are rising, we need to be more profitable so that people will keep investing money in buying our stock, right? Normally, what does the city council do? They'll actually do this. They'll say, okay, here's where your demand is right now, because they can measure it, right? The city council actually has all of the numbers for this graph at their fingertips. They can tell exactly how much money the companies are making. Why would they go ahead and say, yes, you can earn more profit anyways. To some degree, they don't care. It's actually that they do care, but what do they care about? What does a politician... Lobbyists and campaign contributions. Influence. Guess what MGE has been doing lately? Or the companies that work and produce for power companies like MGE. They are run by the Koch brothers, who happen to be some of the biggest donators to large political campaigns on the planet. So all of a sudden, we are seeing MGE advertise so that when it comes time for MGE to ask for a price hike, the city council will say, oh, let me ask my constituents whether MGE deserves a price hike. And we say, seeing these advertisements about how MGE is helping the environment by cleaning up their electrical production plants and how wonderful they are at helping you to have good electricity all the time. They're doing a good job, right? What do we say as constituents? We say, hell yeah, they should get paid another 10%.
Propaganda.
Yeah.
Let's sell it.
Koch brothers own Alliant too.
Yeah, I know. Makes me want to vomit, but theoretically, the monopolists shouldn't advertise, but the more, yeah, well, whatever. They do now, and I struggle to see the benefit from them, but what I've seen over the last 10 years is that price hikes for electricity have gone up more often than not in the last 10 years than they were the 10 years prior. I mean, they ask every year, right? It's just that if you look in the 80s and early 90s, they were rejected every other year. Nowadays, every third year they might get rejected. Maybe. I don't know why, folks. All I know is that it is, okay? I mean, if I knew, I would, probably work for the government more than I do now. And do something about it, but it's beyond me at this stage. There's definitely something else going on that I don't understand, and that's why it's happening. Regardless, though, the fact remains they are definitely not efficient, okay? So you may ask, okay, look at that, they're not efficient. There's all this profit going on. They've got these, they're the price setters. Why the heck do we allow these things to exist? I mean, if we're letting them have profit, I mean, we're like, by law, letting them have profit. I mean, has someone written a law to let you have profit yet? Yeah, if they have, I need to go looking for it, but...
Well, we do have laws against monopolies, don't we?
We do have laws against monopolies, right? That's absolutely right? That's what got, well, yeah, he had to pay all of like 0.001% of his worth to, pay it off.
Ooh, that's
You bet he did. All right, so why do we have monopolies? Well, it does make the world interesting, I'll grant you that. Now, the first one you should already know. What have we already talked about? MGE, how do they get the rights? Right. Government mandate. And why does the government mandate that MGE has the right to sell electricity here, or Alliant has the right to sell electricity, 25 miles away, whatever?
because they're getting their tax money off of it.
Well, they get some tax money off of it, yeah, but it's not really that reason. I mean, why? It's along the right lines of that, but imagine, if you will, there were 8 different power companies in the Janesville area. How do those power companies get you electricity?
Through wires. Oh, they own the wires, don't they? Doesn't the government own the wires?
No, the government actually doesn't own the wires. The government gives them the right to build the wires, but if they didn't build the wires, how would you get the power to them? You wouldn't, right? So imagine, if you will, there were 8 times as many power lines out there on the roads as there are right now. Imagine a winter storm that comes along and starts knocking power lines out.
For safety?
Partially for safety, or it's just it's more, and this is exactly why the government did it, it's more efficient to only have one so they don't waste money competing. Which is just classic. Right? Because you don't want your energy companies competing against each other, because then they might start sabotaging each other's electrical power, and then we wouldn't potentially have power because the government couldn't dictate what the price is, and right? So it actually is a good idea. It's just that the government has lost its ability to, well, they lost their nuts, man. They don't know how to hold them anymore. Every time big companies come around, they roll over and take it.
In the wallet.
Yes. So it's in the wallet, yes, nicely said.
We take it in the wallet.
Nicely said.
Businesses contribute to political parties
Mhm.
or control and influence. They take it in the wallet.
That's absolutely right.
Gifts, favors.
But the idea, though, is sound, right? I mean, if you have electricity, in theory, MG&E is still going to try and produce electricity as efficiently as it can, as long as it's going to continue to make its profit. I mean, this is true, right? I mean, they're going to try and make as much money as they can, so they're going to lower their costs as far as they can. It's just that the price that they get to charge is dictated by the government. And the problem with it is that sometimes the government doesn't see the cost structure of MG&E properly. That's hard to do, right? Because now MG&E is 85,000 different companies, and they can siphon off costs and pull costs in. So MG&E often comes to the government and says, I'm not making enough money to cover my costs, but some of their costs are to advertise to us on TV.
Like that's really needed.
Because we have a choice.
But it is, because they have to do it, right? So again, that's a hard, I'm glad I'm not an elected official, okay? Because that's hard to do. It's hard to deal with, right? And you still want to listen to your constituents, and if your constituents are wowed by the fact that MG&E is building, hydroelectric power plants in some place in, northern Wisconsin, I mean, that sounds like they're a great company, right? We should give them more money, so they'll do more of that, right? Again, let's not go there. All right, now, the other... What other ways cause us to have monopolies? There are lots of other monopolies out there that are not driven by the government. Economies of scale will often lead to there being only one producer of a given good.
What does that mean?
Good question. What do economies of scale mean? Think Chapter 6. What did we say economies of scale were?
The overall market? Long scale.
It's talking about long-run average total cost, right? Where as you get bigger, your costs go down, right? So in other words, if we had just one big company, they could potentially have this wonderfully low average cost to produce a good. Whereas if we had 10 or 15 different companies, the average cost would be much higher per company because they have to have all of that infrastructure, all of the overhead, all of the management, etc., right? So that's part of why governments want to mandate monopolies, right? So that there aren't two different companies with lots of different overhead built into producing our electricity. But this also applies to probably some of our most favorite monopolies. We just don't know they are. Can you think of... No, this is much, much bigger, folks. What's the number one retail seller in the state of Wisconsin?
Beer.
What? Okay, after beer. That's true. Beer is number one. That sells at Walmart and Target and all of the department stores, but mostly at sporting goods stores. Football. The Green Bay Packers. Number one retail seller in the state. Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers are part of a monopoly, folks. How many NFLs aren't there out there? There's one NFL. How come there's not two? Think of the money that the NFL's making. I mean, think. I mean, the Green Bay Packers are the small market economy. They're making roughly somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion a year. They're small, folks. Very small. They're the third smallest, market in the country. So think about Bears, think about New York, think about California, think about Texas. Why aren't there more NFLs? Right? Realize that all of those football teams are all a subsidiary of the National Football League. Why aren't there more of them? Why haven't we started the NFL 2? Well, there was the AFC and the NFC for a little while that existed. Why did they merge? Why did the NFC and the AFC come together to form the NFL? To make more money, to lower their average costs, right? They were moving down the long-run average total cost curve, earning the economies of scale. They lowered their average costs, right? It was perfect. Again, this was the first start. That first football, the Super Bowl back in the 70s, right, 60s, whichever, yeah, with the Jets and whatever, Joe Namath. That was the first year that the NFL started to recognize gross profit as opposed to just profit, right? And that was because the NFC and the AFC merged and became one conglomerate, if you will. So how come there isn't a second NFL? Well, yes, they're making billions of dollars, but how much are they spending? What's the average football player make? Yeah, way the hell more than me. Amen, sister. So the minimum wage in the NFL is $350,000 a year. And that's if you play one game, and you're on the practice squad the whole year.
Then if you win the Super Bowl and they get paid more.
Oh yeah, heck yeah, there's tons of bonus. And this $350,000 is for the Joe Blow who you never hear their name except when they get a penalty called against them, right? And, the part of the dime package that comes in once when they're sweeping up at the end of the year. What do the average football player makes? Somewhere between $1.5 and $1.75 million. And how many people are on a football team? What's the roster?
Too damn many.
52. What's their practice squad roster size? Another 52. Each one of those guys in the practice squad is making somewhere around $150,000 to $250,000 a year. Think about how much it costs to run the stadium. Lights, fields, providing footballs, paying for the referees, or paying the referees, however you want to look at that. Right? I mean, it's not exactly cheap, right? So the problem with starting another football league is that there's a ton of overhead needed. So is there ever been a time where there was a football team or a football league that tried to compete with the NFL? Does anybody remember the USFL? XFL and the USFL, right? It was XFL, pre-XFL is actually the USFL, right? This is, who's the Texas billionaire who ran for president? Yeah, Ross Perot. He started the USFL back in the mid-'80s, mid to late 80s when the NFL was first taking off. He created an 8-team league, the US Football League. And they actually competed with the NFL. Guess what the NFL did back in the 80s? Couldn't afford it, didn't have enough money. What'd they do, though? Remember, they get to set the price. Where football makes most of its money is from TV. What did they do in the 80s?
They sold ad space.
No, again, they get to set the price. They're all of a sudden getting competition. Do they want competition? No. How do you get rid of competition? Undercut them. That's absolutely right. What did the NFL do back in the 80s? They operated a loss for 3 years as a corporation. Why? So that the USFL wouldn't be able to get as much money to survive. That's why the USFL folded. Did you hear anything from the U.S. government about how this monopoly was being manipulated? No, we didn't hear a word about it. There was a lawsuit that was brought up, and what the players' union did in order to guarantee that they didn't get a suit against them was they actually agreed with the owners that this wasn't a monopoly, that these football teams were actually competing against each other as subsidiary cross-product applications. They did some economic mumbo-jumbo, basically to say, oh, owners, by the way, you are going to start profit sharing with the players' union. And that's where the profit sharing came about, was in the 80s and in USFL competition. It was great. It was so awesome. I mean, from an economist's perspective, right? Because I'm watching as the revenues for the NFL just drop and drop and drop. And they were losing money for almost 6 months. The only time in their history they ever did. But it was purely to undercut the competition and to get them to fold. And they knew, the NFL had deep pockets already by the 80s. So they were sitting out there, the owners, smoking their stogies, saying, Ross, sorry, buddy. Even your pockets aren't that deep. And they weren't. So he ran for president instead. Poor guy. All right, so keeping...
So does the government give monopolies money then?
No, they set the price for them. They don't give them money, they just set the price such that they will make money.
So like government sets the price for the NFL, like how much the
Well, no, not the NFL, because the NFL has been dictated not a monopoly, technically.
Isn't the Green Bay Packers, for instance, they're unionized. They're self-owned, air quotes.
They're the only non-individually owned franchise that exists, yes.
Okay.
But the reason why the NFL is not considered a monopoly is because the franchises are who paid the NFL, and the franchising, since it's done through 32 different teams, is why it's now considered not a monopoly, theoretically.
So is this list kind of either or, like why do we have monopolies? It's either a government and
Yep.
and department or economies of scale.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Keeping average costs low, i.e. the NFL, right? And it works for all the other major sporting networks, right? I mean, if you think about Major League Baseball, NBA, all of those sporting leagues, really there's only one of them that's really competing against itself to some degree, if you will. I mean, there are semi-competition. If you think of baseball, there's minor league baseball, but who owns all of the minor league teams? The major league teams, and they're actually just feeders up to them, right? I mean, that's and the NBA is getting to be more like that. If you look at some of the small divisional teams that are floating around in the CBA, they're actually becoming feeders for the NBA. And that's definitely the way the hockey is, right? Most of the hockey teams that you can go and watch around the country are semi-hires, right?
Wasn't Amway considered monopoly years ago?
Amway, that one's Amway was almost considered a pyramid scheme, but we'll maybe get to that if we have time. All right. Now,
I'll admit it.
there is one more way that we can get a monopoly.
Will pyramid schemes come up?
Not really, no.
Aw.
We'll get into it a little bit when we talk about the macro side of things, but it's not part of the micro world. All right, so what do I mean by owner of property that is necessary to produce? Well, property is I should probably not call it property. I should probably call it a resource. How's that? That's a better word. The best example of this one, this is a great example, because it also, again, applies to our local area, Alcoa. Alcoa is they're actually an aluminum producer. They make lots of products now. They diversified. But initially, when they first came into being, they were producers of aluminum. And in fact, they were the only company in the United States to produce aluminum from 1960 through 1992, 3, 4, maybe 5. The only producer. Why? Because they were the only people who found the bauxite mine in Colorado that is the major ingredient used to produce aluminum. So bauxite. Yep.
That's the resource.
Bauxite mines. Alcoa was the only one to find it, and they were the only one clever enough to purchase all of the rights to all of the mines in Colorado that produce bauxite in the United States. And through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Alcoa was one of the most profitable companies in the U.S. Why? Because they had a monopoly on the production of aluminum. Think about all of the aluminum that was being used as we sort of advanced as an industry-based company or country through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? We left the steel industry and we moved more towards the aluminum industry. That was our goal. Why? Because it was cheaper and it was also easier to make, right? Cheaper, easier, and it was lighter, right? So that we didn't have to have these big, huge steel things. We could have these cheapo aluminum things. And the nice thing about cheapo aluminum cars is that when you break one of them, do you fix it?
No.
Nah, you just throw it away and get a new one, right? Planned obsolescence, right? That's what Alcoa was counting on. So what Alcoa did is that they had a nice, big, huge, fat monopoly on the production of aluminum. And in fact, from the 70s until the mid-80s, they were the only producer of aluminum in the world. There weren't any bauxite mines anywhere else. It wasn't until China found some of it up in the Mongolian hills that they actually started getting competition. It's really hard for the Chinese to figure out how to mine it too, because we wouldn't tell them. Well, we, not being we, Alcoa wouldn't, right? So they had to figure it out on their own, right? I mean, and it took them a while. And the problem with Alcoa, though, was that they had this monopoly for so long that they forgot how to work without it. What killed Alcoa was that in the early 90s, mid 90s, all of a sudden they had competition. Well, what happens when all of a sudden you have competition? You have to compete. You have to lower your prices, right? Well, if you were working at Alcoa back in the 90s, folks, you went to work for maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. Maybe you worked. I mean, some of the people obviously had to work, but there was definitely a lot of it there where there wasn't a whole lot of work going on because they didn't need to, right? They were selling aluminum left and right. They were selling it at the highest price that they could get, right? They were, they weren't trying to be cost efficient in any way, shape, or form. They were just trying to make profit. So they kept the prices nice and high. They kept their supply restricted as much as possible. And yeah, they did a whole bunch of mining, but they had enough reserves of bauxite that once the mine started to deplete, they were just like, oh yeah, we've got 30 years worth of it to go. We can just hang out. And since the bauxite mines were empty, what did they do to all the mining companies that they had hired to mine? They closed them down, right? I mean, because the mines were empty. And all of a sudden they said, wow, look at our costs. They went down even further. So what happened to their profits? They went even higher, and they were just like, I work for Alcoa. Thanks for the more money. And there wasn't anything that really, I mean, there wasn't even anything really that the U.S. government could do because they didn't really understand how much money Alcoa was making because they were a very private company, and they were very good at being a private company. So that their profits were unseen by the U.S. government for a long time. And the U.S. government didn't mind because actually Alcoa paid their taxes. I mean, governments, when they get money, they tend to look the other way. Not that it's not a bad or a good thing, but this lasted for a long time. They were great at it, and the problem with them that over the last 10 years is that they've had to rebuild themselves to learn how to compete. It's taking a while, and that's why they're suffering at the moment. But the owning of a specific resource that is the only resource needed to produce an item, that'll definitely give you a nice little happy monopoly, right? Same sort of thing for drug companies, right? When you come up with the rights or you discover how to make a cheap drug that cures hangnails, right? You get a monopoly for 10 years so that nobody else can copy your drug that fixes hangnails, right? Or, fixes hair loss, or fixes back hair, or fixes performance. Whatever. Both sides of the coin have a particular pill for them, so, I'm not going to talk about it, but the fact remains is that those are still they're in copyright, right? That you can't make a generic for it yet. You have to make something that's different if you come up with something different, right? So all those other companies that are competing with Viagra have come up with a different formula somehow. I don't want to know how.
Lots of testing.
Yeah, like I said, I don't want to know. That is.
Happy guy.
Yeah.
Smile.
That smile just makes me really. Let's just leave that one alone.
Moving on.
Yes, moving right along. Woo! So these are the reasons why we get monopolies. Now, some of the things that monopolies do are relatively interesting, and I want to cover one more of them from Chapter 8, and then we'll call it a day on Chapter 8. All right, so one of the other things that monopolies do is they actually price discriminate. Number 4 is in what sense?
After.
Oh, no, there was 3, 3.5, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right?
No, the one with why do we have monopolies now?
Why do we have?
Oh, no, these are done. These are done. These are the 3 reasons. Yeah, this is something totally new. Sorry. So yeah, these are the 3 reasons why we have monopolies. I suppose I should have prefaced that with there are 3 of them. Please remember the 3 of them. These are the 3, this is something that you should memorize, okay? I.e., there will be a quiz question that asks you, why do we have monopolies? And, there will be a 4th one that's not the right answer. Probably have to deal with me somehow. All right, so... Marshallic. Maybe I'll switch to a Muntism. I'll use my last name instead of my first name. All right, so price discrimination. Now, you may think that's a bad thing, right? Anytime you hear the word discriminate, everybody thinks, oh, my God. Yeah, exactly. It's like, this is actually a good thing. What it is senior citizen discounts. So when you go to the movies, if you are able to prove that you are of age, you can get your movie tickets at a cheaper price. Why do they let... True, to some degree, but most of them do it, right? The question is, why? To bring in money, right? To continue to make additional profit. So the reason why is, right, elasticity is noticeably, if this is how you spell it, noticeably different. Now, let's try and think about that. Why would elasticity being noticeably different make a difference? Well, think back to Chapter 5, and I know this is mean, but it's a good mean. When something is inelastic, what sort of a demand curve does it have? If it's perfectly inelastic, it's straight up and down. So if it's just inelastic, it's steep, right? So let's assume that movie theaters know the demand for movies, and they know that it's relatively inelastic, right? I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I try to think about it. I think, how much did I used to pay when I was in high school to go to a movie? Yeah, I mean, I paid somewhere between $2 and $3 a movie, right? Of course, I'm not as young as some of these people. Anyways, the prices of movies have definitely shot up in the last few years. And the reason why is because movie theaters have understood that they're trying to measure their level of inelasticity for their demand, right? They're trying to look at the young people and say, okay, you young people, oh, hell, all of you are young people. Even you, Vic. You like the movies. Even when the price is $7 a movie, you're going to go.
Nope, I won't go to the movies. I'll rather wait till it comes out on video.
I practically have a theater in my house. I don't need to worry about it.
Regardless, they have also diversified into the DVD market. They have diversified into the online movie market, such that they can hit all of the different levels of elasticity that are out there. The fact remains is that you will watch movies. Now, the thing about it is that when we are young, we are in the quote-unquote prime of our earning time. So we can afford a $7 movie. If you are retired and say you're 60, 65, and you are now on a fixed income because you retired, if they raise the price from $7 to $8, what happens to you? You're not part of the market. Yeah, they priced you out. And that's what the movie theaters discovered in the early 2000s, late 1990s, is that they priced old people out of the market. And when they noticed, they didn't really notice at first, folks, because they were still making money. They didn't, and again, they don't really they don't care. But what they noticed was that Hollywood changed. Think about the 90s and the early 2000s. How many movies were made in those time frames that were geared towards older individuals?
Not a lot.
Hardly a one. There were hardly any, right? I mean, and when one of them did come out, it was like, wow! All of a sudden, they made a whole bunch of money on the movie, and they were like, well, how come there aren't a whole bunch of these going out here? And 3 or 4 more of them would come right after, and they would flop. Not because they were different actors and different actresses and bad movies. They just the target audience couldn't afford it. They're like, look, I go to 1 movie a month at most because I'm.
Or Grumpy Old Men. They made like 2 of those.
Exactly, well, to some degree. On Golden Pond, exactly. All these good movies that were out there. So now what's happened in the last few years is that the movie theaters have figured out that the elasticity of demand for older individuals is not as inelastic. It's more elastic. old people are a little bit smarter than the young people. When they don't have something to do and they can't afford to go to a movie, they know that there's a public library, and they go there, and they get a book, and they read a book. Funny how that works. Well, there's that on top of it. They didn't have to learn how to work it, right? So they were just like, I'll just go get a book from the movie theater, or I'll sit down with the newspaper and I'll do the crossword or whatever, right? So the key then was, okay, the movie theaters looked at the demand they had from young people and looked at the demand that they had from older individuals and said, how can we make profit from both of these groups? Well, they said, okay, what we'll do is we'll take a little peek. We'll say, okay, here's our cost curves. Here's our average total cost. Here's our average variable cost. Let me try and get this supply in the right spot so that it makes sense to some degree.
That's the same as the marginal cost.
This is our marginal revenue, or yeah, cost, sorry. Cost. I was thinking revenue and wrote cost. All right, so here's our supply curve. Now, what we do is we say, okay, here's the demand for, now this is going to get hairy, so my advice to you, draw the graph down, but just watch and listen, okay? Because this is, the lines are going to be frickin' everywhere, and you guys would all just kind of go, so just watch and observe to some degree. All right. So what we do is we've got these two demand curves. Now, normally, what do I do to get my marginal revenue? Cut it in half. Perfect. Okay. So what we have to do is to say, okay, young people, here, let's cut our marginal revenue in half. This is the marginal revenue for young people. Here's where it intersects, and here's the price, $7 a movie, right? And notice that there's not a whole lot of profit being made, right? Movie theaters actually don't make a whole lot of profit on movies. Where they make most of their money is on concessions, yeah. So that's why they push those a lot harder than anything else. But the key then is, what about these old people? Well, notice theirs is much flatter, so their marginal revenue is going to be much flatter as well, right? So, oh yeah, okay. It's not like it's a big deal. It works the same way. Where does their marginal revenue hit marginal cost? Right here. What price do they charge for the old people? $5 a movie. And notice, they're actually still making a profit off of the old people, right? And they actually make more money off of the old people than they do the young people because they get more of them to show up if they charge that lower price. And the quantity actually makes up for it, right? I mean, think about those 11 o'clock movies on a Wednesday afternoon. Who the heck is going to those? Well, it ain't you and I. Me too. But somebody has to be driving the demand for those particular products, right? That's where it's coming from. And if enough of the retired and living on a fixed income people show up, they still make a profit, right? And that's what they're looking to do. That's why they've been, slowly or more regularly creating these price discriminatory settings, right? I mean, even McDonald's knows how to do it, folks, right? If you're, if you get a free cup of coffee if you're over 60 every time you show up, right? That's.
And then they go in there and they sit for hours drinking their coffee and they buy sandwiches and everything else that goes on.
Exactly, of course. But they have to give them a free cup of coffee first. So they have to actually lower, they know that their demand is a little bit lower. Maybe they'll only buy one hamburger, but that's enough. That's all it takes. Because coffee's dirt cheap, man.
Oh, sure, honey. Drop off the grandkids. I'll watch them for a while.
Amen. All right, so again, there has to be noticeably different elasticity, and there needs to be one other thing going on, right? In other words, you can't go to the movie theater when you're 40 or 30 or 20 even and say, I'm 60 and I get to get in for $5, right? That's why they'll ID you when you go to the movie theater. Same thing goes for McDonald's, right? When you're old enough and you can go in and get your free coffee, you can't go in, get your free coffee, and then hand that free coffee to someone who's below the age line. Theoretically, that's actually against the rules. It says so in the McDonald's fine print that says if you're getting a free cup of coffee, you can't give it to someone else.
Is it against the law? Like,
It's against McDonald's.
my dad bought us all of our state park tickets to put in our windows because he got them at a discounted price.
Technically, that's breaking the law. That's you switching groups, and theoretically, they will stop offering the price discriminatory level settings if they notice people doing it.
So what if you're a senior, you're going to school, and you get a student discount? How's that?
It's a double bonus, right? You should get twice the discount. All right, but folks, this really is the end of Chapter 8. There's nothing more to it, right? It's basically the same as Chapter 7, except it's the monopoly instead of the perfect competition. Oh, yeah. Did I give you the Chapter 7 homework yet? No? All right. Heck yeah. All right, so homework, Chapter 7. Four, 5, 6, and 12. And Chapter 8. 2, 6, 8, and 12. I gave you an odd one. Be happy.
So both of those are due.
Next Monday.
Both of these will be due Wednesday. We will go over them on Wednesday and then get them to me by Monday next week.
So they can be due till Monday.
Yeah, you have until Monday, but we will go over them on Wednesday. So if you do need to start them so you can at least ask questions on which one's going to be most annoying.